No, I'm telling you, I can't do this now. I have someplace else to be. You're going to have to wait. I'm sorry, folks. I was all set to do the first episode of Romeo and Shakespeare, but I got dragged into this desperate intervention. Just give me a couple of moments so I can wrap this up. I promise I'll be right back to you. I don't know how else to put this, but to tell you that it's like your lights are on, but no one's home. This woman has completely taken over your thought process. It's almost like your mind is not your own. You should have been home with your wife, Octavia, honoring your vows and loving your children. But instead, you say that you can't sleep and you can't eat. Do you think this is normal behavior? You're one of the 3 pillars of the world, and yet, instead of being focused on your responsibilities, you're fixated on the East where you say that your pleasure lies. I mean, I'm no expert, but even to me, there's no doubt that you're in deep. Enobarbus, one of your most trusted friends and soldiers, tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen, and that's why he deserted you. It's almost like you see the signs, but you can't read. Don't you realize that your fortunes have corrupted honest men? Now, maybe you think that you're immune to this stuff, but you don't realize how completely consumed you are with this enchanting queen and your adulterous relationship. It's closer to the truth to say that you can't get enough. I mean, just look at your decisions in the Battle of Actium that cost you to discourage your troops and lose the wars. I tell thee this, Mark Antony, you're going to have to face it. You're addicted to love. If you ever see the 2000 film Pearl Harbor, there's a great scene in the movie where a very attractive Kate Beckinsale in a very striking red dress comes to see Danny. And his friend looks at this woman and tells him, "Women cloud the mind." This would have been truly good advice for Mark Antony. So let's go through the plot of Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony, who was one of the 3 triumvirates of the Roman Republic, along with Octavius Caesar and Lepidus, neglected his soldierly duties after being captivated by Egypt's queen Cleopatra. He ignored Rome's domestic problems, including the fact that his 3rd wife, Fulvia, rebelled against Octavius and soon after died. Octavius calls Antony back to Rome from Alexandria to help him fight against Sextus Pompey, who is a master of the Mediterranean. Cleopatra begs Antony not to go to Rome, but after repeatedly affirming his love for her, he eventually leaves. The triumvirates meet in Rome, where Antony and Octavius find a way to resolve their disagreements. Octavius' general Agrippa proposes that Antony should marry Octavius' sister, Octavia, thus solidifying the bond between the 2 men. Antony accepts, but Antony's lieutenant Enobarbus knows that Octavia can never stop Antony from returning to Cleopatra. A soothsayer lets Antony know that he is sure to lose if he ever tries to defeat Octavius. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, Cleopatra hears of Antony's marriage to Octavia and becomes furious at the messenger who brought her the news. She demonstrates her vanity by asking numerous questions about and then criticizing Octavia's features. Before battle, Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus meet with Sextus Pompey and offer him a truce. He can retain Sicily and Sardinia, but he must help rid the sea of pirates and send tributes to Rome, which Pompey accepts. They have an excessive drunken celebration on Pompey's galley, although Octavius leaves a little bit early, fairly sober. Minos, a former pirate who is now loyal to Pompey, suggests to Pompey that if he lets Minos kill the 3 triumvirates, Pompey would become the sole ruler of the world. But Pompey refuses because it would go against his honor. He also chides Minos for not having acted on his own. After Antony departs from Rome to Athens, Octavius and Lepidus go to war with Pompey and defeat him. Antony leaves his wife after 3 years and returns to Alexandria, where he crowns Cleopatra and himself as rulers of Egypt and the eastern third of the Roman Republic. He accuses Octavius of not giving him his fair share of Pompey's lands and learns that Lepidus has been imprisoned and killed by Octavius. Antony and Octavius prepare for battle. Enobarbus urges Antony to fight on land to give his leader the advantage. Antony refuses because Octavius dares him to fight at sea. Cleopatra pledges her fleet to aid Antony. Unfortunately, during the Battle of Actium, off the western coast of Greece, Cleopatra flees with her 60 ships, and Antony follows her, leading his forces to ruin. Antony becomes deeply ashamed of what he did for Cleopatra and reproaches her for making him a coward. But after much grand gestures on both sides, he completely forgives her and says, "Give me a kiss. Even this repays me." Octavius sends a messenger to Cleopatra, asking her to betray Antony and come over to his side. She hesitates and flirts with his messenger. Antony walks in and is furious about her behavior. He has the messenger whipped, but eventually he forgives Cleopatra once again and pledges to fight another battle for her. On the eve of the battle, Enobarbus, Antony's long-serving loyal lieutenant, deserts him and goes over to Octavius's side. But rather than confiscating all of Enobarbus's treasures and belongings which he left behind, Antony sends everything to Enobarbus. Enobarbus, who is so overwhelmed by Antony's generosity and so ashamed by his own disloyalty, exclaims, "I am alone the villain of the earth," and he dies from a broken heart. Antony loses the battle, and his troops desert him en masse, and he is furious at Cleopatra, saying, "This foul Egyptian has betrayed me, triple-turned whore." He resolves to kill her for her treachery, but Cleopatra decides that the only way to win back Antony's love is to send word that she has killed herself, and that her last word was Antony. She locks herself in her monument with her women for their protection. Unfortunately, Cleopatra's plan backfires, and Antony decides that his own life is not worth living. He begs one of his aides, Eros, to run him through with a sword. But Eros kills himself instead to escape the sadness of Antony's death. Antony admires his courage and attempts to do the same, and wounds himself badly, but not to the point of sudden death. In great pain, he finds out that Cleopatra is actually still alive. He asks his guards to hoist him up so that he can be with Cleopatra in her monument, where he dies in her arms. Now that Egypt has been defeated, Cleopatra is placed under the guard of Roman soldiers. She tries to take her own life with a dagger, but Proculaeus succeeds in disarming her. Octavius arrives and assures Cleopatra that she will be treated with honor and dignity. But the loyal Dolabella secretly warns her that Octavius intends to parade her in his Roman triumph. Cleopatra bitterly anticipates that there will be endless humiliations awaiting her for the rest of her life as a Roman conquest. She decides to kill herself with an asp and longs to meet Antony again in the afterlife. Her serving maids, Iris and Charmian, also die, Iris from a broken heart and Charmian from one of the 2 asps in Cleopatra's basket. Octavius discovers the dead bodies and experiences conflicting emotions. While Antony and Cleopatra's death leave him free to be the first Roman emperor, Octavius feels guilt and remorse for having relentlessly hunted them. He orders a public military funeral for the both of them and their servants. When we get back, we'll look at the characters that make up this remarkable tragedy. There certainly are a lot of interesting characters in Antony and Cleopatra, so let's go through some of the major ones. We'll start with Mark Antony. Now, this is a very different Mark Antony than we see in Julius Caesar, because now he is world-weary, he's content to live in his love nest with his queen, shirking his responsibilities to his wife, his soldiers, and his fellow world sharers. In fact, it seems that his greatest failing is that he's forgotten that the price of greatness is responsibility. Next up, we have Cleopatra. Now, the way she's portrayed through Shakespeare is that she is a drama queen, she is flighty, fickle, unpredictable, maddening, and insecure, primarily concerned about herself. In fact, when Mark Antony dies, her first question is, "What's die? Have no care for me?" She's so self-absorbed. Charmin and Iris are her ladies-in-waiting. They are her confidants and her emotional supporters, and they're both very loyal, and they're even willing to die with her. Let's go over Octavius Caesar. Now, he is powerful, serious, and very loyal to his sister Octavius, and he is the foster nephew of Julius Caesar. Now, that's important because Julius Caesar did not have any legitimate male heirs. There's also Enobarbus. Now, he's a close confidant of Mark Antony, and Shakespeare uses Enobarbus to ask Mark Antony questions that we want to know the answers to and to learn Antony's private thoughts. He's very loyal to him for much of the play, and he tries to help Mark Antony until he realizes that Cleopatra's hold on him is greater than his own. Now let's talk about the triumvirate. Now this is Mark Antony. He is the warrior. His soldiership is twice that of the other twain. He shirks his responsibilities from the other two. Then you have Octavius Caesar. He's the younger one, and he's the least experienced, although he wields the most amount of power and operates with a clear head. And then you have Lepidus. He's a foolish old man, and in this play he's over the hill, he drinks too much, and he's easily dispatched by Caesar. We also have Eros, who is a slave and a soldier who is faithfully loyal to Mark Antony. In fact, he would rather kill himself to avoid what he calls the sadness of Antony's death than to take Antony's life, even when Antony requests it. In fact, his suicide is considered honorable and noble by the Romans and the Egyptians. There's also Proculaeus. Now, Mark Antony specifically tells Cleopatra that the only soldier that she should trust that is loyal to Octavius Caesar is Proculaeus. This also demonstrates Antony's poor judgment because he's not telling her the truth. And Donabella, who is a loyal soldier to Octavius Caesar also, is actually the one that tells Cleopatra the truth at his own risk. We also have Fulvia. Now, this is Mark Antony's very, very powerful third wife who is unseen in the play, but she creates problems for her disloyal husband by going to war against Octavius Caesar. There's also Fulvia, who we see for a short bit in this play, Mark Antony's fourth wife. She serves as a bridge of peace between Antony and Octavius, but she also creates problems with Antony because he is not faithful to her. Both of these wives are inconvenient to Antony and Cleopatra's relationship. Now, there's also one other character I want to mention, and this is the clown. He's only in the last scene. And he serves two purposes. Number one, he has to deliver the asp to Cleopatra, the mechanism for her to commit suicide, and to add some comic relief. In fact, these are the things he says. First, Cleopatra asks him if he has the pretty worm of Nilus that kills and pains not. And the clown says, "Truly I have him, but I would not be the party that desire you to touch him, for his biting is immortal." What he means is mortal or fatal. And those that do die of it do seldom or never recover. Well, if they die of it, how do they seldom recover? Cleopatra then asks if he remembers any who died from it, and the clown says, "Very many, men and women too. I heard of one of them no longer than yesterday, a very honest woman, but something given to lie, as a woman should not do, but in the way of honesty." This is Shakespeare just having fun with somebody who's considered a clown and not an educated person. There's also a correlation at the very beginning of The Merry Wives of Windsor, where Master Shallow asks the very humorous Welshman, Sir Hugh Evans, is Falstaff in Master Page's house. Knowing that his response will anger Master Shallow, Sir Hugh replies, "Shall I tell you a lie? I do despise a liar as I do one that is false, or as I despise one that is not true. So, as you see, Shakespeare takes every opportunity, even in a tragedy, to add a little bit of humor. All right, now we're going to talk about plot devices and memorable scenes in Antony and Cleopatra. Well, there's a couple of plot devices that Shakespeare uses in other plays too. The first one is having somebody else kill you because you ask them to do it. In Julius Caesar, we see that a few different times. In this one, we see Mark Antony ask his servant, his slave, Eros, to do it, who he made promise to do it as well. Eros refuses to do it and kills himself instead because he is just so loyal to Antony. He doesn't want to see the sadness of Antony dying. Also, another plot device that's used here is the soothsayer, who provides prophecies which almost always come true in the Shakespeare plays. In this one, Mark Antony asks the soothsayer, who would be victorious, Octavius or me? And he says, Octavius, stay away from him. We're not going to talk too much about the plot devices in here, but we are going to see them in the other plays as we go through them. But I do want to talk about the barge scene. I still remember my very first college course on Shakespeare. I always wanted to see the play performed after hearing the description of the barge scene. What I didn't discover until later, however, is that because it's such an elaborate setting, it's very difficult to perform it on stage, so we have to have Enobarbus verbally describe what takes place for this extravagant set. So here's what he says to Agrippa and Maecenas. This is describing when Antony meets Cleopatra. The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion, cloth of gold, of tissue. We're picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side of her stood pretty dimpled boys, like smiling cupids, with divers colored fans, whose wing did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool, and what they undid, did. At the helm a seeming mermaid steers, the silken tackle swell with the touches of those flower-soft hands that yearly frame the office. From the barge a strange invisible perfume hits the scents of the adjacent wharfs. The city cast her people out upon her, and Antony, enthroned in the marketplace, did sit alone, whistling to the air, which, but for vacancy, had gone to gaze on Cleopatra too, and made a gap in nature. Wow, what a description. Agrippa later says of Cleopatra, royal wench. She made great Caesar lay his sword to bed. He plowed her, and she cropped. Now, Agrippa is referring to a rumor that Cleopatra was brought by Apollodorus to Julius Caesar in a carpet or a rolled-up mattress cover. Cleopatra did bear Caesar a son whose name was Octavian. By the way, actress Claudette Colbert, who played Cleopatra in the 1934 Cecil B. DeMille version of that film of the same name, said it was quite difficult to be rolled out into a mattress, breathe, and come up looking pleased with yourself. They also did it in one take. Now, there's another scene that I want to talk to about in here. Maecenas later says, now Antony must leave her utterly. And here is Enobarbus's reply. Never. He will not. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. Other women cloy or sicken the appetites they feed, but she makes hungry where most she satisfies. The vilest things become themselves in her, that the holy priests bless her when she is riggish, that is, lustful or sexually unrestrained. Now, there's a lot of talk in this play about serpents, snakes, crocodiles, and worms, but they rarely ever use the right description for each of these creatures. But I love this description of the crocodile that Mark Antony makes to Lepidus. While feasting aboard Pompey's ship, the drunken Lepidus says to Mark Antony, "You have strange serpents there in Egypt. What manner of thing is your crocodile?" Now, Mark Antony, who we hear admit in Julius Caesar that he thinks that Lepidus is a washed-up old fool, decides to have some fun at his expense since he's already drunk, and he says, "It is shaped, sir, like itself, and it is as broad as it hath breadth. It is just so high as it is, and it moves with its own organs. It lives by that which nourished it, and the elements, once out of it, transmigrates, and the tears of it are wet." Does that help you understand what a crocodile looks like? When Lepidus asks, "What color is it?" Mark Antony replies, "Of its own color too," to which Lepidus says, "'Tis a strange serpent." It's not even a serpent. But again, I'm trying to point out to you what really makes Shakespeare great is the dialogue and the descriptions that go into every single line. Strength and cowardice are two themes that run throughout this entire play. Octavius Caesar demonstrates his strength consistently throughout the entire play. Mark Antony is sought out because of his well-known military skill and expertise and strength, which is repeatedly acknowledged by Octavius Caesar, Lepidus, and Pompey. However, Mark Antony demonstrates his cowardice by turning tail during the Battle of Actium and following Cleopatra, and in doing so he disgraces himself, loses the credibility in the eyes of his men and also those of his adversaries. Cleopatra shows her strength when she is willing to go to sea to battle alongside of Antony. However, fearing that the battle is lost, she flees at the height of the conflict and thus alters the outcome from success to failure. Still, at the end of the play, Cleopatra decides to end her life on her own terms, rather than be paraded around Rome as one of Caesar's triumphs. So you see, as with all of Shakespeare's plays, his willingness to include the depths of his characters is what makes his work so enduring. What really sets apart Shakespeare from so many other playwrights is his ability to phrase things in romantic, memorable, and often unforgettable ways. Here are just a few of the most powerful lines in Antony and Cleopatra. After losing the Battle of Actium because of Cleopatra's cowardice, an enraged Antony exclaims, "O whither hast thou led me, Egypt? Thou knewest too well my heart was to thy rudder tied by the strings, and thou shouldst tow me after. You didst know how much you were my conqueror, and that my sword, made weak by my affection, would obey it on all cause." Yet only 2 lines later, after Cleopatra asks for pardon, Mark Antony replies, "Fall not a tear, I say. One of them rates all that is won and lost. Give me a kiss. Even this repays me." Talk about being addicted to love. When Enobarbus abandons Mark Antony, he says, "I am alone, the villain of the earth, and I feel I am so most." And after he finds a ditch wherein to die, he laments, "Let the world rank me in register, a master leaver and a fugitive. Oh, Antony. Oh, Antony." And when Octavius Caesar learns of Antony's death, he says, The breaking of so great a thing should make a greater crack. Wow. When Cleopatra realizes that Octavius Caesar is telling her what she wants to hear, she says to her women, "He words me, girl. He words me." And as Cleopatra prepares for her own death, she tells her women, "Give me my robe. Put on my crown. I have immortal longings in me." And finally, when Iris dies before Cleopatra, she panics and says, "This proves me base. If she first meets the curlet Antony, he'll make demand of her and spend that kiss, which is my heaven to have." Such is the vanity of Shakespeare's Cleopatra. In any play, be it Shakespeare's or anyone else's, you're always going to have major turning points, and they determine the outcome that happens in that particular play. Now, in a tragedy, they're even more important because you realize had different actions been taken at these points, maybe the outcome would have been different. So let's go through the major turning points in Antony and Cleopatra. I also want to point out some correlations to some of the other Shakespeare plays that we're going to find here as well. So the first one takes place in Act 2, Scene 2, and it's Antony lying to Octavia, now his wife. He says, "Read not my transgressions in the world's report, but that to come shall all be done by the rule." Well, if he had only taken his own advice, things would have been much better for him. Second turning point is in Act 3, Scene 2. Antony now lies to Octavius Caesar, his wife's brother. "You shall not find, though you be therein curious, the least cause of what you seem to fear." In other words, I don't know why you think I'm going to run back to Egypt to Cleopatra again, but he does. So remember, if you're going to lie to your wife, you're going to pay a heavy price. And if you're going to lie to your wife's brother, who also happens to be one of the three pillars of the world, and your leadership colleague, you're going to make a very powerful enemy. The third turning point is in Act 2, Scene 7, and this is between Minos, a former pirate, who's now joined up with Pompey and is loyal to him, and Pompey himself. Now, they're at a drunken revelry on Pompey's galley, and they're hosting Lepidus, Octavius Caesar, and Mark Antony. And Minos has to pull Pompey away from the festivities, and he says to him, "Will thou be lord of all the world?" And he wants to know what he's saying. He says, "You have these three world sharers here. They're all drunk. Let me cut their throats." And Pompey surprises him and says, "This should have been done and not spoke on it. In me 'tis villainy, in thee it had been good service. Thou must know 'tis not my profit that does lead mine honor it. Being done unknown, I should have found it afterwards well done, but must condemn it now. Desist and drink." In other words, Pompey is saying to Minos, it would have been better for you to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. Now, there's a correlation at the end of Richard II. Exton kills Richard II in the Tower because he thinks Henry IV will thank him for it, but he doesn't. Instead, he rebukes him and he banishes him, saying, "Exton, I thank thee not, for thou hast wrought a deed of slander with thy fatal hand upon my head and all this famous land. Though I did wish him dead, I hate the murderer, love him murdered. With Cain, go wander through the shades of night, and never show thy head by day nor night." Now, there's also another correlation to this in King John. The king tells Hubert to kill Arthur and then chides him after he thinks he's done it and doesn't take any responsibility. He says, "Hadst not thou been by, a fellow by the hand of nature marked, quoted and signed to do a deed of shame, this matter had not come into my mind, but taking note of thy abhorred aspect, finding thee fit for bloodied villainy, apt, liable to be employed in danger, I faintly broke with thee about Arthur's death, and thou, to be endeared by a king, made no conscience to destroy a prince. We're going to see this same situation played out over and over again with different variations on the same theme in the other plays. But what we should take away from the situation is that, with or without permission, it's never a good idea to commit murder because you think it might please your king or benefit yourself. And the final turning point is in Act 3, Scene 7. This is Antony talking to one of his soldiers, Comitius, and he says, "We will fight by sea, for that he dare us to it." Now, Antony also challenged Octavius Caesar to one-on-one combat, but Caesar, knowing that he would be outmatched, declined Antony's offer. Antony, on the other hand, takes the bait and accepts Caesar's challenge to fight at sea, even though he knows Caesar will have the military advantage, and as a result, he winds up being defeated by Caesar. In poker, there's a saying, if you look around the table and you can't figure out who the chump is, it's you. So the lesson I want you to remember is, don't be a chump. In doing some research for this video, I found some interesting facts I want to share with you. First of all, Cleopatra could speak anywhere from between 9 and 12 different languages, making her very powerful. These included Egyptian, Latin, Greek, Ethiopian, and Macedonian. In fact, she wasn't even Egyptian. She was born in Alexandria, but her father was from Macedonia, which was part of Greece. At the time, she was the only female ruler of a nation in the entire world. She was only 39 years old when she died, and Mark Antony was 53. She had one son to Julius Caesar named Octavian, and she was in Rome at the time of Caesar's assassination. She had 3 children to Mark Antony, and Mark Antony had 2 to 3 children with Octavia. He was away from her for 3 years at least. Even though a guard says that the fig leaves in the basket containing the asp have slime upon them, snakes are not slimy. Oh well, nobody's perfect. Now, let's talk about the actors in Antony and Cleopatra. But before I cover who was in the 1980 BBC version, I do want to note that Charlton Heston also directed and starred in a version in 1972. It was fairly unremarkable, except for one scene in which Proculaeus wants to get into Cleopatra's monument. He gives his soldiers a signal, and then they each move their shields to create a ramp, and he climbs up it into the monument before she can take her own life. It's quite an excellent visual addition to this play. Now, in the 1972 Charlton Heston version, Jane Lapoitiere plays Charmian, one of Cleopatra's women. But in the 1980 Royal Shakespeare Company version, she gets a promotion and plays Cleopatra herself. She also went on to portray Lady Macbeth in the 1980 Royal Shakespeare Company version of Macbeth. Anthony Pedley, excellent actor, who plays Agrippa in the 1980 Shakespeare Company version, will also play Rodrigo in Othello, Junius Brutus in Coriolanus, Ajax in Troilus and Cressida, and Tranio in The Taming of the Shrew. By the way, Simon Chandler, who plays Eros in the 1980 Royal Shakespeare Company version, also joins Anthony Pedley as Lucentio in The Taming of the Shrew and plays Master Fenton in The Merry Wives of Windsor. So you can see it's all connected. All right, now it's time for this week's Romeo on Shakespeare trivia questions. Shakespeare certainly wrote many of the most famous quotes in the English language. However, very few of them were the first line of any play. Here are the 3 most famous first lines of Shakespeare plays. Can you name the play from the quote? And you get extra credit if you can say who said them. Number 1, if music be the food of love, play on. Number 2, Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the Son of York. And number 3, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? You think you know them? Let's see if you can get them without looking them up. When we get back, I'll give you the answers to all 3, and let's see if you know who said them too. All right, how did you do? Could you get the answers without looking them up? They really weren't that hard. Number 1, if music be the food of love, play on. That was Count Orsino in Twelfth Night, probably the most famous of all of Shakespeare's first lines. Number 2, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the Son of York. That is Richard III in Richard III. In fact, one of my books, I started off with a line, "What is the source of your discontentment?" because I was so inspired by hearing that quote. And number 3, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? That is spoken by the first witch in Macbeth. I'll bet you got them all. Let's talk about some relevant lessons to take away from Antony and Cleopatra. First of all, don't blur the lines. If you're going to be a leader, then you have to be willing to sacrifice your own personal desires. And if you're married, don't go running off to be with someone else. We should all know that lesson. Number 2, keep your loyalty straight if you want to be a leader worth following. And number 3, don't take the bait. When your enemy dares you for his own advantage, it's wiser to decline. And finally, one thing you have to give Cleopatra. Between being rolled up in a mattress cover to be introduced to Julius Caesar, or the incredible barge scene that she staged for meeting Mark Antony, the woman certainly knew how to make an entrance. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time and find out why all that glisters is not gold.